Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Dying Your Way podcast. I am very excited to introduce to you our special guest today, Susan Goldie. She is an end-of-life strategist for the CCNB organization, and we'll get into what all those letters mean in a little bit. But just let me tell you a little bit about Susan. She is has incredible academic credentials, the University of Cambridge, working on sustainable business. I mean, what is that all about? I love that is happening. And she's just been a leader and manager for many, many community organizations. And end of life is a passion for her. And I'm really looking forward into the organizations that she's working with and how she's really leading a leading voice in end of life for Australia and hopefully setting a footprint for beyond. So let me introduce you now to Susan Goldie, a delightful woman. You'll love her. Hi, Susan. How are you today?
Claire, I'm really good. Thank you.
I kind of mumbled and stumbled over this incredible bio. Oh my gosh, there was just so much I couldn't even get into all of it. I was really impressed with your resume, and thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're particularly busy right now with the Dying to Know Day and the merger and stuff, but we'll talk about that. That you took the time to be on this podcast really means a lot to me, and I look forward to this time that we have together.
Oh, it's a pleasure and a privilege, Claire, talking to like-minded people about that extraordinary space that's end of life.
Yeah.
Happy to be.
Yeah. One of the things that you said in an email to me, that end of life was the heart space for you, that had a real deep meaning for you. And the way you said it was just so beautiful. And I just wondered if you could just share with me what that meant for you.
Thank you for that question, Claire. I'm an old lawyer by trade, and
a young old lawyer.
Yeah. And I've been in the community sector for many years.
Yeah.
There, I had at a particular period in time, I had spent about a decade in the mental health space with a wonderful program called Mental Health First Aid. I was travelling the country, empowering communities and workplaces with better understanding about mental illness and how to respond. And that, of course, also meant I was talking to people about shocking deaths, bad deaths around suicide. Towards the end of that decade, I for various reasons, I needed to look at a second job. And I completely unexpectedly found myself employed by a wonderful little organisation called Home Hospice. And that organisation was one of the very early Australian influences around more conversation at end of life and around preparing families and communities for more choice at end of life, with a focus on training peer leaders and volunteers to support families where a person dying had chosen to die at home. I didn't know when I joined this organisation that I had found a heart space, but quite unexpectedly, I found myself absolutely in love with the work. And what it was this sense of privilege. I wake up every day with this sense of privilege that I was being invited into a sacred space, a space that was full of life and love and celebration, and a space where I could help people to make a difference in the lives of others in the most profound way. 10 years later, after that wonderful time, Claire, I found myself back in the end-of-life space, and that also came as a bit of a surprise. I had finished up a large role working with a big, iconic Australian charity, and I was focusing on sustainability and recycling. And I had that luxury of sitting for a couple of months and thinking, okay, what do I want to do now for the next 10 years? And what kept coming back to me was the call to end of life and looking at how I could contribute to the way Australians live well, die well, and grieve well. And here I am.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure you know many people and perhaps your own family where, we're supporting our parents at the end of their lives. And yeah, 80% of us want to die at home. And I'm not sure what the stats are in Australia, but I think it's probably less than 75% are actually dying at home. So it's not, or not even 75% that are dying in medical facilities. I think probably 25-30% are actually able to die at home.
Less than that, I think, in Australia.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was a study, I think, that the Stanford School of Medicine did, that where I got those stats, about 80% want to die at home. And, it makes so much economic sense. Talk about sustainability. I mean, it really makes sense for people to stay where they are medically. And I know because of COVID, there's a lot of telemedicine that has become common now in the United States, where it wasn't so much there. And it's one of the blessings that has come out of COVID, if there is one. And anyway, but I also wanted to find out about the merger that has happened recently with the Groundswell Project and CCNB, that stands for the Compassionate Communities of North Beach, or what does the CCNB stand for?
That's an inspired guess. CCNB, we'll start there, is a place-based community organisation, and the initials stand for Community Care Northern Beaches. And for 25 years, the Northern Beaches of New South Wales has been the heartland for this organisation. But CCNB is changing rapidly and will be growing to a national organisation. And that's one of the first reasons why Groundswell, which already has a national footprint, was a good fit. Secondly, Claire, CCNB has spent a quarter of a decade supporting families across northern Sydney in aged care, disability support services and mental health services. And that's looking at, I guess, a couple of ways of working. Firstly, supporting people to understand those complex systems that provide care. And we do what's called care navigation. How do you help people even begin to understand the services that are available and how to access them?
Yeah.
And secondly, having done that, helping people, once we've helped people to navigate care, we then, through a brokerage model, put together the packages of care that people need. So, for example, with home care packages, they're for older Australians wanting to age in place, and CCNB can help them think through what matters to them and how they want to live well at home, and then put together a mix of community services, volunteer services, medical services that will enable them to do that and achieve what they want.
So are those packages based on level of care that's needed? I looked at the models, and it was very clear. But where my mind went, and part of this is just my American mind probably, is that I was like thinking they were government packages, and you were helping them navigate their level of care each time they had a new change. So straighten me out here, because obviously I'm confused.
No, it's a good question. They are government packages.
Okay.
Yeah, no, they absolutely are government packages, but it can be very difficult to navigate the options and the best way to utilise them.
It's interesting because in the United States, their medical system is not nearly as good as it is in Australia. I mean, it's just so much better here. But when it comes to end of life, it's like that's where it's just everything's free, and that's one reason why they're having such a hard time with figuring out what they're going to do with their models of care, because there's so much money spent at the end of life. But I don't see the hurdles that people have to go through to get different levels of care that they do here. And I mean, even if you're Australian, how do you know about CCNB? How do you know about that? And how do you know to anticipate the transitions that would happen as a disease progresses?
Look, they're really all really good questions. And I think part of where CCNB traditionally has been is not so much with life-limiting illness as it is with aged care.
Okay.
And for me, one of the ironies about the end-of-life space in Australia is that you're right, I think we are a lucky country. We've got palliative care services. We've got aged care services, albeit in need of significant changes, but that's happening. But those two sets of services work in silos. And we need to get much better at providing great healthcare and great social supports for people as they age, because you don't need a life-limiting illness to know that at some stage you're coming to end of life. And there are worse ways and better ways to progress through that.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a conversation with Dr. Sarah Moore, and we were talking about, she's basically a pediatrician, an obstetrician, but she also is in the end of life stage as a GP, working with patients, and just talking about the needs of the people at end of life in the palliative care, and how it would be wonderful to see a model where there was palliative care for any stage and age and illness. You had mental disease and palliative care came in. You had a horrible accident and palliative care came in. You had mental health issues, all of those. And then so when we're getting older, aging, becoming frailer, less vital, those services need to amp up, and that it's seamless. So going into hospice, which happens way too late here and every other Western country, it just happens way too late, because people are, I don't know, there are a lot of different reasons for it, but you can expound on. I mean, I just think that, there are a lot of areas to make it a seamless transition at any stage in life. Yeah.
Claire, I think, for me personally, one of the frustrations is the stigma. Certainly in Australia, I don't know about the States, but in Australia, that stigma around palliative care. People have a misconception that palliative care is a death sentence. And it seems to me from the outside looking in that the medical profession sees it as some kind of professional failure. Yeah. That curative care, curative medicine is what we have to fight for. That comfort medicine is not as valuable a contribution, and that seems very strange to me. That the concept of health promoting palliative care is so powerful to me, that idea that there is a medical discipline which focuses on quality of life and supporting your loved ones around you as well. Mm-hmm. That's what palliative care offers. It's such a rich offering.
Oh, yes.
And I agree with you. We come to it far too late. And it seems to have a role. It seems to me that it should have a role. And I think a lot of palliative care clinicians would say the same. I'm sure they would. That palliative care should be introduced much, much sooner.
Well, I agree with you that it's a branding issue. It seems like it's so either or. You're like curing, or you're, dying, and you've given up the cure. And what as I work with people, I try to say, no, you can have palliative care while you're in the curative stages. You don't have to wait to die to get relief from pain, or to get relief from symptoms, or to get social support, or to get all of the things that come with palliative care. Yeah, it's well, I'm just really thrilled that you're in the position that you're in. I just so often I do see gaps in service, as I'm working with people, and there are just, whether it's an unexpected death or a planned death, I mean, there are just always things that happen in transitions that need to be managed. And one of the things, as I was reading information, there was something about the new Health Connector and Community Connector program that just seems so promising to me. Could you talk a little bit about that program?
Sure. So broadly, the idea of community and health connectors comes out of a British model, which is broadly sits within the health the public health palliative, the public health palliative care movement, and is a cornerstone of the global compassionate communities movement, which is about building capacity in communities to respond with compassion around distress in general, and particularly around end of life. How can communities build capacity? And by communities, Claire, we mean institutions and organisations and systems, not just neighbourhoods. So it's a pretty bold concept. And the connector idea is, it's not rocket science, but of course that's its power. In institutional settings, broadly or adjacent to institutional settings, how can we build leadership capabilities and roles for people who can advocate for families and support families and individuals with those pathways back and forth between clinical and community services that enable the right mix of supports to wrap around an individual as they are dying, and help them to live well and to experience comfort and to access exactly the clinical and the community supports that they need.
So that would typically be a role that a social worker would provide, or who navigates that or coordinates that in the model that you're talking about?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and and when you talk about it as a program, it's an idea, and there are pilots, and it is still quite new. It's one of the things that we would love to be doing, and we are definitely looking at as part of the benefit of the merger between CCNB and Groundswell, but it's not yet a profession as such. And you're absolutely right. Social workers are an ideal category of professional or allied health professional, but it would be nurses. It sits within general practice. It sits in the community sector as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest, and I know there are a lot of trained doulas in the East Coast, not so many here on the West Coast, but they're trained in end-of-life care and anticipating transitions. So that might be another group of people to support that, just to help.
Doulas are coming increasingly to the fore in these sorts of conversations in Australia as well, which is a very exciting development. The community connector role, which is a complementary role, sits more within a, I guess, more familiar community development, asset-based approach to building leadership and capabilities in communities, and supporting individuals to know what assets are in a local community to support good living and good dying, and to have the confidence and the connections to perhaps pull together volunteers who might be able to do anything from the school run to the meal run to the pet walking to the gardening, to whatever, as well as be connected to the clinical services and the allied health services within a community.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm very proud of the community where I live, because the Bunbury-Bustleton area, they have really embraced this concept of compassionate communities. And I volunteer at the hospice in Bustleton, but, I know some of the people that are spearheading the compassionate community model, which I think it's what you're talking about. And, first of all, they have hearts of gold, but they have a real passion about, supporting people to stay at home. And it's coming. It's not quite there yet, but I just love seeing the enthusiasm and the desire to meet the community where they are and what they want,
Yes. And to provide, we talk about choice, giving Australians better choice that's aligned to cultural values, to family values, to personal values. And as you said earlier in this conversation, Claire, the vast majority of us, or a large majority of us, would like to die at home. But we want people to have choice about a good dying.
Yeah, and for some people, dying at home is not the best option, for many different reasons. But, if you plan ahead and things are put in place and you know what your community resources are, it's much more likely to happen. I know with my mother, she had Alzheimer's, so staying at home 24/7 wasn't an option for her until the very end. But I had it arranged with hospice that when she started into the terminal condition, that they brought her home so she could die at home. So my sister could come from California so we could sing musical comedy songs to her, while she was dying. And it was just lovely that, and I couldn't have done it without hospice support. Could not have happened. But it also wouldn't have happened if I didn't plan ahead, and really communicate clearly what it was that we wanted.
I think that is a really powerful point. One of the other reasons why CCNB and Groundswell have merged is because we want to build more capacity around good conversations, whether it's good conversations about what support somebody needs to stay in their own home, or to really utilise their abilities instead of being framed up by their disability or a good death. It's about, as you say, good conversations and support to plan ahead. And people are afraid of those conversations. People don't know enough yet about what one needs to plan for to make these things happen. But with the right support, we all can exercise choice. And that's just a lovely example you've given of being able to bring your mum home.
Yeah.
Because that was the choice your family wanted.
Yeah, it wasn't. I mean, it's interesting. I think all of us love to put these decisions off until the very last minute. I mean, I think that's just probably human nature to do that. But I was fortunate because both of my parents, they were divorced, but both of them had planned ahead and they had all their paperwork in place and they had me designated in the roles that I played. And it was only because of their planning and because I got good advice from my aunt to get hospice involved soon that, I was learning on the fly, but boy, it was 6 years of going from zero to, knowing everything about death and dying. It was not anticipated. It's hard for people to look at that. And I understand that, but I find people are more amiable to talk about it while they're healthy, and sometimes it's millennials. They have no problem talking about death and dying. Sometimes they're my greatest audiences, having millennials. And so, well, we talked a little bit about the home care packages and how that is, could you just expand on that? So people that are listening to this, particularly in Australia, just get some idea if they are facing a life-threatening illness, what is available to them, whether they're in a metropolitan area like Sydney or they are, in the rural outback, what is available to them, and where do they go to get this information?
That's a good question. And home care packages are about aged care. So I'm not sure. I think that there are a range of issues there with a life-limiting diagnosis. And sadly, depending on where you are in Australia, the answer, Claire, will vary differently. Western Australia, interestingly, has been a leader in providing what used to be called, I think, home hospital through a particular service provider, which morphed then into an end-of-life, a home hospice style support service as well. And I believe that Western Australia has been a real model in remote communities as well as in regional communities in having access to the kind of services that would enable somebody with significant symptoms and a life-limiting illness to get both the information and the support they need to make choices about being at home. Mm-hmm. In other parts of the country, there's no one answer. About 10 years ago in New South Wales Health invested a huge amount in palliative care for the first time. And one of the fundamental principles was this idea that Australians were so disadvantaged according to their postcode and whether they lived in rural or regional or remote parts of the country in relation to their access to palliative care. So that has been a real focus in New South Wales, and I can't speak to the other states, but I can only assume that that is also the case. But if, for example, your disease is life-limiting, then the cancer councils across Australia, I've worked for Cancer Council New South Wales for many years, and that is probably your one-stop shop for a range of what we would call information and guidance resources and referrals out to specialist services in your area. But with other diseases, it becomes more and more problematic, I think, as to how you get that information and then how you action it according to your own needs.
Yeah, the access is an issue. It's always an issue, I think, whatever country that you're in. But I think before access, it's just educating people to know that it exists and knows what to ask for, knowing what to ask for. Because maybe you could be in the outback and you could say, oh, I have this ALS, and now all of a sudden, I'm going to need some support at home. And if you have an idea of your prognosis, then you can know what to ask for, but people don't even want to find out what their prognosis is.
No, and that is yes, you're absolutely right. That is a challenging problem. We talk about death literacy, and one of the programs that Groundswell offers is a couple of hours program called 10 Things to Know Before You Go. And that is about introducing anybody from a community member, perhaps somebody looking at retirement, somebody worried about frail-aged parents, a worker in a community or even a clinical setting, thinking about an introduction to some pretty fundamental questions that I might need to start thinking about as end-of-life approaches. Mm-hmm. And then what on earth I do about it to action that process of improving my literacy, my health literacy and my death literacy. And of course, it all starts with a conversation. It's not, if I don't want to know the prognosis, that very first conversation is going to be very difficult. It all starts with those simple, soft skills around either seeding a conversation for somebody else and just being gently able to open the door to a conversation,
And it's not just one conversation. You have to
No,
have that same conversation many times.
yes, it's a
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, it really is.
And as you said earlier in this conversation, people are frightened. People are deeply, deeply frightened about it. And I think also, while it is human nature, I think some cultures traditionally are better at these conversations than others. Certainly, my culture. I'm an Anglo-Australian, I guess. My culture is not good at having conversations about emotions, and people are fearful that tough conversations like conversations about dying or life-limiting illness are emotional. So I'm scared that I will be emotional, so I don't want the conversation.
Yeah. And part of the problem is that we've separated death into a medical event and away from the society where it's happening. So you have a whole generation of people that have not even seen anyone die. So the only thing they've seen are the movies or TV or news or something, and they believe that's what death is like, and it's just not.
No. I think there's a nice statistic that we quote, which is that people spend about 5% of their time during perhaps the last year of life with medical professionals, and 95% of our time with family and friends. And yet, we focus, as you said, on death as a medicalised event, and it's become sanitised. And part of the way that Groundswell talks about this conversation is about the need to reclaim death as a social event.
Yeah.
Part of me is Irish, and I wonder whether, a small part, but I wonder whether that's part of what that call was for me. The Irish have a tradition of understanding how to celebrate in death and dying and death well, and to go with the tears and the laughter. But you're right, we have medicalised death and sanitised it, and we need to reclaim it as a normal event and as a social event, with all those crucially important rites of passage that enable good grieving and integration of distress and difficulty and pain into our narratives. And we somehow lost the art of that along the way.
But we can reclaim it. And one of the ways we can reclaim it, I wanted to really spend some time talking about the Dying to Know Day, because it's coming up August the 8th.
It is.
And I participated in it last year in Bunbury, and I'll be doing a death cafe in Bustleton this year. This is where I got a chance to see the amazing people that are in this community doing work and coordinated work around death and dying. So let's let the listeners know about Dying to Know Day, and kind of things to look for and participate in.
Fantastic, Claire. Dying to Know Day was started by Groundswell, I think, 9 years ago. And it started out as a legacy arts project. How do we think about ways of capturing legacy through art projects? It has grown to this fantastic movement, which is everything from academic papers and research and presentations about all sorts of aspects of palliative care and end of life, and the importance of ritual, the importance of good grieving. Lots of events. I think, needless to say, COVID has cut a bit of a swathe through planning for Dying to Know Day events all across the country. But we have got collaborators right across Australia. We ask people to register their event on our Dying to Know Day website, and not for any reason other than we have got collateral and resources we can support you, and we're really interested to know what you're doing so we can share the fabulous work. And Dying to Know Day might be about saying, okay, I'm going to have a cup of coffee with my neighbour because I know they're struggling with an aged parent who is at end of life. Dying to Know Day might be about setting up a death cafe, and perhaps I might leave you to talk about what death cafes are. They're a movement that I really privileges the importance of the conversation and creating that safe space to talk about our fears around death and dying. It might be about looking how communities can come together, such as the event coming up in Bunbury in Western Australia, to share community assets that can support neighbourhoods and communities collectively through end of life. It might be around looking at the way funerals can be very different and death rites can be different. We are going to be setting up a lovely space on the Corso at Manly, COVID permitting, and we're going to be inviting passers-by to write on a big board. The opening sentence stem is going to be "Before I die." ... And we hope
gives me chills.
Well, we hope that people, Claire, will put statements there that are about a passion for living, but in recognition of our mortality. So we want to remind people that it's all about living and living well until we're dead. It's coming to all of us. But we hope that the Before I Die board that we're setting up to celebrate Dying to Know Day will really get people, thinking about living well, because that's such an important part of what we need to embrace.
We're fortunate in Western Australia that we have not had any significant COVID outbreak at all and live life normally, although the borders closed tighter than a tick, once there's any kind of outbreak anywhere. But life goes on normal here. And some of the things that I've seen that they're doing on Dying to Know Day, and it's stretching from like Friday to Monday. So it's like,
we're thinking of the whole month.
Yeah, it's just like they're doing things at the funeral homes, throwing a champagne thing where we're at the funeral home, and there's a new beautiful nature cemetery where people can have a natural burial that, people can go look at that. There is visits to the crematorium. There are, a lot of, like you say, providers that are coming together just to introduce themselves, and be part of it. But yeah, there's just a lot of support for grief and bereavement and opportunities to talk and share and just get more information and just, again, get comfortable with talking about death. It's okay to talk about death. And so I'm looking forward to it. So I know you have been in lockdown for a while. What has that been like for all of you in New South Wales and Sydney specifically?
Look, for me personally, I just get up every morning and am so grateful for my experience. My family is safe. Part of my family is in the UK, and that's been a challenge. And I think one of my family members, Claire, was on one of those last flights on the 20th of March last year, fleeing the States.
Yeah.
But it is very tough. It is so tough for families facing real financial hardship, for families supporting children and their education at home. And I think one of the loneliest parts of lockdown is around end of life. We all know families where a family member has died alone, where death has been celebrated in such an impoverished way when families needed something richer around them to support them. And I think that lockdown, it means a lot of tough things for a lot of people, but at end of life, I think it really amplifies the loneliness and the lack of connection and the pain of not dying well and not being able to express pain and laughter and tears through those rites of grief at funeral time, and being isolated and unconnected in bereavement. And I think that is one of the toughest aspects across the globe. What can I say? Across the globe of the impact of COVID.
Yeah, it's really challenging when, you have to, you're in a medical facility and you can't get someone in that's part of your family to come be with you, whether you're at the end stages of life or just, separated from your family for any reason. It's just very, very, very difficult. So I'm sorry. I mean, we have a daughter in Sydney, so we really, we know it's tough. We've seen our grandchild once since he's been born, so it's not easy. So I think there will be lessons learned, and there will be opportunities we can all take from this hardship to make end of life better. I mean, I can think of a lot of different ways, but there's just, it's certainly an opportunity to slow down and look at things and ponder what is meaningful. What is meaningful. So, Susan, if you had all the resources available to you, and if you could just wave a magic wand and make public policy or systems or the things that you've talked about, I'm so happy that you're, in a leadership position to do this. But if you could, what would you do to claim death back? What would you do?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, Claire. I think, I don't know how many levers I'm allowed, but I'm going to take
any.
3. And they pick up things that we've talked about this afternoon. Firstly, I would make palliative care not only accessible to every Australian, but understood by every Australian and every clinician. I think that's the first thing. I think that would just be a game changer.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, I would be building referral pathways between the clinical, the allied health and the community sectors, so that somebody at end of life can have access to true wraparound services, and their families can have that access, so that a GP can refer out to a community organisation that does pet dog walking, so that a community connector knows how to refer a family to a bereavement social worker, so that we stop this siloed approach to care at end of life. So that's the second thing, really integrated pathways. And thirdly, I think building capability, harmonisation of advanced care planning regulations across every state and territory, and building a cohort of people who can seed conversations, can facilitate conversations, and can help people document those aspects of end-of-life conversations which are required to be documented, so that people can truly exercise the choice of their idea of a good end of life, an end of life well lived, and a good death.
So what I hear you saying, it's really describing something that's national in scope. It's not, as you said, siloed or state to state and different in different states. And so are there national leaders in the political realm that are on this?
So the report into our aged care services has identified the urgent need to address palliative care in an aged care setting, and national organisations such as Advanced Care Planning Australia are constantly advocating for both harmonisation of regulations and for better support for documenting quality conversations. But the little guys who punch above their weight, such as Groundswell, Claire, have for the last decade been saying we need to have compassionate communities everywhere across Australia who are death literate and who understand that starting the conversation is crucial. And small organisations like Groundswell have hosted the kind of research which has demonstrated the importance of the social networks around people, which precedes the need for clinical community referral pathways. So there are champions out there, and I'm very confident that the merger between CCNB and Groundswell will amplify that first decade's legacy, which has been the groundbreaking start to this, and that we will move now into systems change from top down and bottom up. You can't do it in any one direction. It's got to be all hands to the pump and solutions from all directions.
Well, and it needs leadership at the top, and it needs systems expertise like yourself to identify the bottlenecks and identify the gaps and identify, I just from the level where I am, and for as little time as I've spent in Australia, I see a lot of really good people doing a lot of really good things, and it's not coordinated. No. And their hearts are there, their skills and abilities are there, and they are really wanting to serve this community in a very professional way. And it's, my hat is off to you so much. I cannot tell you how grateful I am. We're going to end with, how people can get in touch with you or find out more, but I'm just going to hold up this book because here's a wonderful book that I got last year, Dying to Know. And it is a beautiful book, but it says Dying to Know, Bringing Death Back to Life. And yes. I got it free going to one of these seminars. It's a free event. And there's just so much to lift you up if you go, and people to meet. It's one of my
favourite books, and if you attended 10 Things to Know Before You Go session, you'll also get one of those. Yes, you can get in touch with us at ccnb.com.au, at thegroundswellproject.com.au, at dyingtoknowday.com. So we are very, I hope, very accessible. And Claire, can I thank you so much for the opportunity to spend time with a like-minded advocate in the space, and for all the work you do supporting people, I gather, particularly with life-limiting prognoses towards end of life. And I'm going to be sad that I'm not going to be in Bunbury and Busselton and the Southwest in a few weeks' time, but can I say thank you for your leadership and your contribution to the Compassionate Communities movement over in Western Australia.
Yeah, it takes a lot of voices, and you can't have the conversation too many times. And thank you for your time. And I'm so happy to meet you, really. And we know how to be in touch. And, I saw also, I want to mention that you are on the board member of Tender Funerals Associations, which is a whole different conversation that we could have, because there are a lot of options at the end of life concerning funerals too. So maybe that's another conversation coming up.
Fantastic. I'd love that as well.
Okay. So nice to meet you, Susan. Thank you so much.
Claire, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure.
Me too. Thank you. Bye.